And oops, just pop that recording on there. Thank you so much. And just a brief introduction to this man's extraordinary range of skills. I first met Jay through his, not in person, because he's a new delight for me to meet live, whereas he and Leah go way, way back. But I have met Jay and have known of him through his fabulous story crafting book, Retellable, which is about unlocking stories, unlocking your ways of crafting and discerning and fine-tuning and shaping and offering stories out into the world in a way that is memorable and potent and inspiring. And through that book, I came to get a sense of Jay as a man with a mission to support interconnectivity with people, to support community and ways of people coming together through sharing stories. And the name of his book, Retellable, to share stories that can be retold over and over and over again. And Jay is going to be leading us through a process and a few stories today and ways of helping listen for and craft stories, and probably a fair bit of other magic as well. So Jay also has a business where he teaches people and companies and leaders around the world how to tease out their stories, their origin stories, their impact stories, and then to offer them in a world in a way that is immensely memorable. So welcome, Jay. And if you just love to open your hearts and open your minds and your hands in just some way of sending some energy to welcome Jay and let him get a sense and a feel of you being here in this circle here today. And over to you, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, and thank you everybody for showing up from your seats, wherever those seats may be. And I'd like to really honor Jacqueline for showing up in her seat at 3:30 a.m. I was about to say ungodly hour, but I kind of think it's a pretty godly hour. I know for myself, when 3 a.m. strikes, I'm often awakening to insights and stories and dreams that are coming through and wanting to speak to me. So I'm really appreciative that we have some time today to drop in. We get this great title of exploring your life's wisdom. And as Jacqueline said, I have made a career out of this. I've helped leaders around the world, and by leaders, it might mean the founder of a company, it might mean the founder of a movement, it might mean someone who just really has a story that needs to be told. Might be someone who, like last year, I helped someone to write a book on navigating cancer through a kind of soulful path, also autobiographies, etc. But the main gist of my work is really finding those gems and shaping them. And that's what we're going to explore today, those true gems of our lives and how they show up in stories and how they can show up in stories. So with no more ado, can I get screen sharing, please? We're going to go screen share. I'm also, I'm speaking to you from the mountains of Southern Oregon. So that's where I am located. I have known Leah for a long time, probably almost 20 years now. We met in the Bay Area when I was living in the Bay Area. And I'm just honored to be invited and to be able to hopefully give you some gems that you can take away with you that can inform your path, even in the smallest way. That's my intention. So going to share with, this is the funny, awkward moment where you get to see all my screens. So last week, I was visiting my parents in Southern California, where I grew up. And I picked up my dad from dialysis. He's been in dialysis for a couple of years. And he was walking very, very slowly to the car. And he sat down really carefully. You know, dialysis is a process when your kidneys are no longer functioning. They basically hook up to a machine and it takes your blood and it cleans it, all of your blood over the course of about 5 hours. And what is said is that once you go on dialysis, you get about 3 to 6 months to live. And my dad has been doing this for 2 years now. And so he sits down in the car and he looks at me really slowly and he says, "Is Izzy at the gym?" Izzy's my son, my 16-year-old son, and we were on spring break. And so I had taken him and his brother, him and his sister to go and visit the grandparents. And so I look at my dad and I said, "Yes, Izzy's at the gym." Now, my dad was a college basketball coach for many years and a high school basketball coach for many years before that. And he is a kind of practitioner of this soulful, sacred craft of basketball. That is how to elevate those around you through athletics and interconnectivity and your own physical capacity. And so he looks at me slowly and he says, "Let's go." And I'm thinking, like, I don't know if he's gonna make it to the gym, you know, walking. I don't know what it's gonna take because he's going so slowly. But as we start to approach the gym where Izzy's playing, he starts to perk up a little bit. And once we get there and we have the walk from the parking lot and the handicapped area that with his placard into the gym, he starts to walk a little more steadily. And by the time we get to the gym, he's talking to Izzy and saying, "Hey, you got to get, now look, you got to get down in defense. Look, I want to see when you're shooting. I want to see that wrist. Here we go. Come on, Izzy, what are you doing?" And he is like he is 35 years old again. And I'm standing there by him trying to make sure he doesn't fall down. And I share this with you in part because it's very alive for me in this moment. I just got off the phone with him when I was walking the dog. And in these moments where we're kind of witnessing so much on the edge, we're witnessing so much change and it's coming so quickly. And I look at my dad and I think about people that have gone through really transformative acts and still know how to tap into that soulful connectivity of what gives them life. And it's my purpose to help people to find that life, to look back in the course of their lives and find the gems of insight and shape them and bring them to this time so that we can feel more alive and more purposeful. And we can respect what we've learned and leave behind what we're ready to leave behind. So that's what we're going to look at today in the realm of story. When Steve Jobs was 17 years old, he found this magazine article in Scientific American. And it was about the efficiency of species. It was about which species was the most efficient, which could travel 1 kilometer on the least amount of energy. And what he discovered was surprising to him. Humans were kind of middle of the pack, not the most efficient species. The condor, in fact, was by far the most efficient. And I've spent a little time in South America in some very high mountain ranges. And I've heard the condor and the sound of the feathers high above, almost like a helicopter blowing right above you. And I'm not too surprised that it was the condor that was most efficient. But what was striking to Steve at that young age was not just that the condor was most efficient, it was that somebody had the idea to take the human and put the human on a bicycle. And what they found was when you put a person on a bicycle, the human becomes the most efficient of all of the species by far, by an order of magnitude. And so what he discovered and what he realized and what he cultivated from that time, and it was a story that he told at the beginning of Apple when he had founded it in the early 80s. What he discovered was that a computer, in a way, is a bicycle for the mind. A computer furthers our ideas. It furthers our thoughts. It furthers our capacities to connect with one another. I mean, we get used to this whole thing now, but if you look around the room and you see these faces from different angles of the world, how incredibly unique that this bicycle for the mind can carry us so far. And I think that is truly fascinating. And the reason why I'm telling you this today, on this April day, is because I believe that a computer might be a bicycle for the mind, but a story is a bicycle for the heart. A story is what compels us, what creates the traveling of emotions, what gathers insights and propels them to others who might see that story very differently, but it makes them feel something. It makes them orient themselves. And it provides a transformation that a computer alone will never do. So I honor that we have this bicycle for the mind to propel our ideas and our words. And I also honor that each of you have traveled so far through your lives on this bicycle for the heart, with your stories and your insights, gathering the wisdom of a lifetime. But how do we hold this wisdom? How do we hold it? How do we care for it? How do we share it in a way that's meaningful? Whether your objective is to communicate with your kids, to communicate with your partner, to communicate with an audience large or small, to write those words, to speak those words. How do we gather such a whole lifetime insight, and how do we shape it? Twenty 2020, March of 2020. It's going to mean something for us for our whole lifetimes. And it means something a little bit different to every person. And yet we all went through something somehow related. And all of our stories add up to some greater story. And there is something about March of 2020 and April of 2020 that really strikes me. It was a time where the air above Beijing cleared for the first time in decades. And I had been in Beijing in 1986. And I had ridden on bicycles and seen the swarm of people. And even then, the air was smoggy. But in 2020, it was clear. Coyote walked across the Golden Gate Bridge. Astounding. As it's told, dolphins returned to Venice. Now, I actually don't think that's true. I don't actually think that dolphins returned to Venice, but I don't mind saying it. And a huge amount of transformation happened in the workplace. This resignation, this transformation, this great time of engagement emerged, and people looked up and said, why am I doing this? In fact, what am I doing? In fact, what have I done? And that's what I did during this time. I had actually reached a pinnacle in my career. I had written a book, as Jacqueline so kindly mentioned. I had the objective of becoming a keynote speaker and traveling the world once more, as I did in my 20s. And I ended on March 11th in 2020. I was the keynote speaker, the culminating keynote speaker in Adelaide, Australia, for a very large group of travel professionals. And it was the very same day that the pandemic was declared. So I reached this pinnacle right when everything shut down. And we all reached a pinnacle of some sort. We all reached some moment of transformation that we now place in context of back then. But how do we get this information? Who holds it for us? Is it in the photo albums? Are we lucky enough that Facebook would return it to us? Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Is that where the gems of our wisdom live? Is it in our photo albums? Is it in our phones? The average person has about 2,000 photos in their phone. Is that where these gems of wisdom live? Maybe it's in the metaverse. Maybe it's held out there somewhere. We're going to embody our great gems of wisdom from our lives out there in this kind of great domed future where our avatars embody some lifetime that we could never imagine. Or maybe we're the avatars embodying a lifetime that we could have never imagined. Who knows? So just kind of wrapping, I did make it to the stage. That's me trying to corral these 500 people that may very well have lost their jobs and companies in that very same day. And in fact, the intent was to speak to help people connect around the bushfires and to orient to a possible future together. But that culminated a 7-year journey for me of helping people around the world to become speakers of the big stage. And now the stage is everywhere. So I would like to hear from you in the chat. A little bit of Jacqueline. I'm getting people now that I'm just letting them in. Are you seeing those people too? You can just nod your head, so I won't click them. Okay. Can you share in the chat what a story is? Because it's such a big topic, such a big word, and everybody has a different definition. And we're going to work with a specific definition, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. What is a story? No answer is the wrong answer. And then you can stay where people keep listening and feel it was worth it when you stop. Oh, I love that. Thank you, Fred. A pattern of events, a journey of opportunity and the unraveling of a life. Oh man, this is good. A container of ideas, memory revisited and shared. A collection of images and actions that make sense of the world, that tell ourselves how things came to be. Images and actions that tell us how things, an expression of experience. Great. Let's take all of the definitions from all of the experts in the world. Thank you, Fred. A point in time spoken in an individual mind. Never still, ethereal. Dang. An expression of what is possible. All right. Anybody else? I got two more. I'm waiting for two more. The sharing of your truth. One of my mentors said, I don't know if it actually happened, but it's true. So this whole thing that we call story is basically something that I've spent the last 13 years dedicating my life to thinking about. Sometimes at the time of hour that Jacqueline is up with us at 3:30 in the morning, sometimes in front of large audiences, sometimes in front of small audiences. And what I found is that definitions help, not because we hold to them, but because they become indicators. And so I want to share a little bit of some definitions, and I also want to share a framework that I've worked to distill from many different masters, and I want to offer that to you as something that we're going to practice today. And I'm going to actually I'm going to step into my favorite role, which is story listener for a lot of today. So a story does have a beginning, middle, and end. Right? Would everybody agree? It has a beginning, starts somewhere. There's a middle, and there's an end. But here's the thing. This is what Mr. Schmink taught me in when I was a junior in high school. If you could see to the end of the story, it wouldn't be interesting. That's a little bit more like an explanation. That's the kind of thing when you're about to tell somebody and people begin to kind of gaze off into the distance because they already know where it's going to go. A story, as has been said, as Leah said, about a story is a journey. A story is a journey of transformation. When I think about stories, I actually think a lot about travel stories. I always love leaning, no matter if I'm working with a CEO who's about to speak in front of 10,000 people, or someone who is working on the book of the story of their life that makes you cry and laugh at the same time. A story is a journey of transformation. But it's not just a journey. It's a journey with a twist. And that's my first definition I want to offer you. It's a journey with a twist. So quite simply, we're going the beginning, middle, and end. We're going somewhere, but there's something unsuspected about the experience that makes people pay attention. And in fact, that's where the brain science comes in. It's something unexpected. Suspense releases dopamine. Dopamine sparks curiosity. Curiosity enhances learning. So a lot of the dopamine kind of happens up here. It happens around the beginning as you kind of descend. We're saying, what's going to happen? Are they going to pull this off? Are they going to deliver on the commitment? Am I going to be intrigued? You know, part of that's about trust in your narrator, of course, but part of that is about the narrator's trust in themselves. So dopamine, some cortisol, a little bit of stress, but not too much stress. Too much stress, and we start to pull back. And that's where the second definition comes. A story is a problem. But it's not just a problem. A story is a problem approached in an interesting way that makes us care. A story is a problem approached in an interesting way that makes us care. If it's a problem to solution, like a lot of the folks at the tech companies that I've trained like to believe, if it's a problem to solution, that's fine. But we call that an explanation. We want a little bit of dopamine, a little bit of cortisol, and some oxytocin to create that connection when we resolve at the end. And there's only one thing that's required of a story. There's only one thing, and it's change. It sounds simple, right? But if you're just delivering on the change, or you're just delivering on the meme, let's say, then you don't actually have a story, you have a message. And the message is critical. But I can't tell you how many expert communicators I've worked with, and they are totally reticent to go back to the beginning of the story. They want to go right to the main point. And it takes some creativity, of course. Like I have to push back a little bit, but part of my invitation is to understand how things were before. Now, it's easy to forget how things were before because we're forward-moving beings, right? We're carried by the bicycle of the mind. We're busied by the things that we have to accomplish. We're challenged by the audiences that we're facing or the blank page. And so how you handle how the world was before is part of the critical art, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So drawing from Kurt Vonnegut, a little bit from Joseph Campbell, maybe traveling into the story of Inanna, an ancient myth, a bit from other improvisational storytellers. I workshopped a framework that I've tested 1,000 times, probably more than that. Call it the journey curve. And I only want you to remember 3 things from today. And the 3 things are this: then one day, until finally, and ever since then. Now, I'm hopeful even that you've heard of something like this in your journeys, and I'm imagining that you might have heard each part of these many times. I can tell you, anytime I hear it then one day, I know we're in the realm of story. I can tell you that the until finally, if you remember nothing else from today, I would like you to remember the until finally, because you can't tell an until finally story without a then one day. And a then one day is always better if we have some form of a once upon a time. Because the once upon a time, not featured here, because I believe that if you have a then one day, you're going to remember the once upon a time. The once upon a time shows how the world was. It helps us remember what the world was like, not in our current perspective, and this is really important. It's not in our current perspective, but in our perspective from that time. Then one day, until finally, and ever since then. Ever since then is what reveals the catalytic change. It's what anchors your story in transformation. So this is the journey curve. Once upon a time, the world was like this. I was picking up my dad from dialysis. He was walking very slowly. Then one day, of course, then one day could be just and then. And then he looks at me and he says, "Is Izzy at the gym?" Because of that, I actually called my mom because I was like, Dad wants to go to the gym. We all know what that means. And she said, if Dad wants to go to the gym, take Dad to the gym. Because of that, I turned the car around. Because of that, we went to the gym. And because of that, my dad made it to the court. But I wasn't sure, and this is where we get to the critical moment that I really want to talk about, is that Joseph Campbell innermost cave, the innermost cave moment, the moment of not knowing, the moment of mystery. If there's a moment where the feminine is alive in the depth of story, it is in the depth of the innermost cave. Now, it doesn't always look like hands on knees, but it always looks like a great pause. And that great pause might only last 1 second. And the great pause for me was when my dad started his defensive slide, but he could barely walk. And I didn't know. I actually talked to him. I said, you know how a great coach dies, Dad? He said, what? He said, in the middle of the word defense. Because he laughed, because it's in that expression, in that true expression, that you don't know what's going to happen next. And that was the cave, until finally my dad was moving around and Izzy was hearing what he was having to say, and he was drawing on his 30 years of experience. And ever since then, I've thought about the power of eldership, the power of the gifts that we bring, and the power of the stories that have not yet come to fruition, and the moments that we can tend them and share them with a welcome audience around the world. So I want to invite you to consider a moment of transformation in your life. I want you to consider something that might have been lost, turned into a lesson. Something that was broken, that you felt, that became a lesson that you carried with you. And I wanted to challenge you to use this framework. If you just want to use the until finally, then do so. If you just want to start with once upon a time, then do so. I want to invite you to consider a loss and a lesson. And if you don't have one yet, that's okay. You can let the other person go first. So we're going to do breakout. We're going to take 4 minutes to share a story. Now I'm going to give you a moment before we go off to the breakout, and I want you to write down. If you got pen and paper, then great. If you don't, you can draw it with your finger on the table. Write that curve. Consider how the world was. And when you consider how the world was, make sure to share 2 sensory details. Draw us into that moment, how the world was. You can choose those details to be in your then one day or the once upon a time. Draw us into the story. Show us how it happened. If there's an innermost cave, a moment where you didn't know what was going to happen, bring us there. Let us breathe in that story. Let us hold our breath as you've brought us into that moment where we didn't know what was going to come out of it. And give us an until finally moment. Share what the change was, what the insight was. And you notice the until finally moment is not at the top of the mountain. If it was at the top of the mountain, you could see it from the bottom. The until finally is that candle light of insight that gives you a gift. And then give us an ever since then. Tell us what it means to you now. Tell us how it guides you now. I want to invite you to take a moment to think about this. Just a moment. There is no wrong story. If you're ready, you go first. If you're not ready, ask the other person to go first and see if it's okay. "30 seconds until breakouts, okay? And we're gonna do twos, please, Jacqueline.
Okay. Sorted and ready to go. Jay, just don't you go into the room because I can't keep you out of the assignment. I'll join the person with one.
Got it. So we're gonna let's give it 5 minutes, okay? So
Done.
that means that, can you create, we're gonna do 5 minutes, checking the time, 5 minutes each. So can you create a warning, an exit at 5 minutes each? Can you create an exit at 4 minutes? A reminder, please.
Okay, so that's 10 minutes
10
of
minutes
the
total.
breakout room together.
Yeah, and you might not
5
use
minutes.
it. You can just use that opportunity to talk about the story, to say what came up for you, what you gathered.
Okay. I'll send everybody a timing in. Okay, just give me a hoy when you're ready to open.
Ready?
Ready?
Have fun.
See you soon.
Hi, everybody. I like to see the smiles on your faces coming out of that. I would like to hear in the chat, please. I would like to hear a sensory detail that you heard, that you remember from your partner, please. A sensory detail about their story. Spirit rising in her body. The orange glow of the Scarel Charek bubbling up and out. Fear and unknowing. Couches and soft blankets and pillows for clients. The spirit giving her the proper question that opened up an entire universe. Ooh, like that as a feeling. Her background image made it clear that she was an exotic locale, wet and verdant. The orange glow of the sacral chakra. I thought maybe I was that was an iPhone intervention or a phone intervention. The orange glow of the sacral chakra bubbling up and out. Thank you. So I'll still, as they're coming up, I'm happy, they're welcome. The idea of anchoring in time and place, the idea of coming back to an original friend after the separation, the idea of anchoring in time and space, I really want to invite you to choose in your story, to choose 1 or 2 and maybe even 3 places that you visit in your story, that you can anchor in the senses. And when you do, to work to provide a couple of those sensory details. Maybe it's a little bit about smell, a little bit of color, a little bit of, as I look out, I see the cherry blossoms popping, just barely popping today, cast against the blue sky. Because what that does is it helps the listener. It helps the listener to anchor more deeply into their own recognition of the story itself, which helps to deepen memory. I believe that Leah raised her hand. Was that an accident? Do you want to say something, Leah? Welcome.
I don't think I raised my hand unless there's another Leah.
Okay, well, maybe it was Leah Lamb raising her hand through the ether from the Galapagos, where I think she is right now. My body was filled with light. We're getting some good ones here. Coming to find a perfect family from a chain of divine events and directions. I'm so happy to read some of the deeper realm of insight stories. I find myself to be guided by the deeper realm of insight stories that that I don't often hear as much out in the world, but I support the hearing. I always ask my clients if they've had a visionary experience, and I'm always, I have to admit to you, a little disappointed when I find that if they haven't, or aren't able to share it. Tell me an until finally moment. I know there were a few, so you can repeat it if you want. Let's hear an until finally moment that you heard in your exchange. An until finally moment. Until finally I got set up seeing clients online and provided care this way. Oh my gosh. That is a real until finally 2020 moment. Until finally the fox appeared and went between them. Oh, juicy. The fox appeared. Okay, let's see a couple more. Until finally I realized that the heart bond we share with our nature elders allows us to meet and dialogue in consciousness. Beautiful. Bringing together people and earth for the benefit of the world. I like this theme. I came back into my body and the tumor dropped out of me. Until finally a breakthrough of experiencing was what before something that she took for granted. What she before took for granted was now normal. Until finally a breakthrough of experience, which was before something she took for granted was now normal. The bird found himself and opened up to greater experience of life. Until finally she was surrounded by the love of her recently passed mother while painting art in a museum. Becoming part of the collective. Que sera, sera was the phrase her mother would always say, becoming symbolic of love rather than complacency. Until finally, the space of her life was too small. Until finally, I realized I am a pastor. This Zoom mechanism is too weird for me, but I appreciate that's kind of an until finally moment that I think we've all had as well. So I appreciate you saying it. It is a trying. It is a trying. I would like to ask if, just kind of looking around, if you're comfortable sharing a story, I would like to hear the story that Jan heard. Jan, who were you? Who's your partner?
I was partnered with Ayana.
Ayana?
Mm-hmm.
Ayana, would you be willing to share your story?
My story?
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm the one who was a therapist working. I'd been working in my office for 30 years. I was seeing kids and adults, and it was so homey for me. I could never imagine not being there. I had pillows for the kids to lay on and blankets for people to curl up in and tea. And then the lockdown happened. In the space of one day, I had to turn everything around, call everyone, tell them I was closing my office. There was too much of a risk. And with the help of my colleagues, I jumped right into a Zoom, a confidential Zoom place, and started seeing clients there. And amazingly, they were willing to shift with me. And something that I never believed I would like. I agree with whoever said Zoom is weird. But there was already connection. And I was saying that the boy who was a preteen, he could curl up with his dog while he was talking to me about his stuff. And he could show me his medals. And he did. Oh, I lost everybody. He did get away with playing a little video game once in a while, but I was onto him. And so let's see, I kind of lost my train of the next. So that was, until finally we made the shift. And once that it was made, I realized how much more relaxed I was, and that my clients were so relaxed, and they enjoyed not having to drive in the winter and try to feed their kid on the way. And things really felt suddenly comfortable. And so ever since then, I have embraced the world of the internet and the possibilities that are there.
Thank you, Jan. That's beautiful. What do you like, if you could describe, so let me ask in the chat, what was the once upon a time there?
Well, the once upon a time was that I was enjoying.
Jan, I'm gonna ask everybody in the chat to get
Okay.
everybody's perspective. So what was the once upon a time? Yeah, she had this beautiful snuggly space, clearly luscious, lovely, that you used to like to, that you really spent a lot of time cultivating.
Mhm.
Cozy, yummy, snuggly place. Then one day, what happened? Also in the chat, please. A place of person, Jacqueline, should we do unmute, or is chat working?
Let's see, I think the chat's working to get a big range of response. Here we go.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, then one day COVID. I mean, that's the thing. It's then one day COVID. It's pretty significant. So lockdown, everything changed. And because of that, what happened? Because of that, she was in crisis. Because of that, clearly, she didn't know how to go on. Right. So now we're in descent. Now we're going down. Now we're going down into discovery. She couldn't see the snuggly office. She didn't know what to do. She had to think of a new thing, but what would it be? And what would be the innermost cave? And do we have an innermost cave? In fact, I'm going to come back to Jan. Jan, I want to ask you, I think that we get the lead in, the dropping down into discovery. But what was the moment? Could you share a moment where you really didn't know what you were going to do?
This is where I get tears in my eyes.
We welcome tears.
Because I was a hands-on therapist. I played with the kids. I do something called TheraPlay. We blow bubbles and play games. There was such a loss of just contact. How was I going to be with those kids? How was I going to get the parents to, I mean, that they'd have to get a lot of materials to play bubbles with them at home. How are we going to do this? The adults, how are they going to feel? There were adults that just loved to snuggle in to my chairs, and all of that was just gone.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, this idea of the cave, this idea of hope being lost, as Kimberly said, um, it brings us to a moment where we stop. And again, it might be something that lasts for a second. And again, we might be in stories like that, where we are in a moment of loss, where we don't actually know how to proceed. I know I can name a few that I'm in. And I think that's part of this time. And there are those stories that we've come through, which is the theme of the day. And so thank you, Jan, for dropping a little bit more deeply into that cave, because it brought out a detail that I didn't get, which is that this is play centered, physically centered. That's partially, I think, why you created such a snuggly space. And so losing the direct contact with the child clients must have really been incredibly hard. And so what was the moment where you realized that you could do something else?
I think I should add that one of the things that I do is I'm an attachment therapist, and bonding requires so much physicality, snuggling with their moms, doing things with, you know, with their parents, and even the adults that were seeing me, you know, there's just that. And so what was it? You say that your question again, Jane.
So now understanding how deep that cave was and how hard that moment must have been for you, how did you, what was an insight that led you out?
I think the insight came after the solution. I think I had to continue to see my clients. They were all in the middle of process. And I couldn't just say, see you when the lockdown is over. And so I went to my colleagues. I sought out my colleagues who are more tech savvy. And we talked about the confidential platforms and all of that kind of stuff, and things called a business agreement, and you know, so I learned the ropes very quickly thanks to having colleagues to turn to, and just jumped on to a platform and started to see people, and I think the insight came after that. You know, realizing this, you know, this could happen. And I had parents that continued to play with their kids, but they got the stuff together ahead of time. I sent them materials. They sat on the floor with their kids and you know, and had the computer there. And there was a surprising realness that I didn't expect, a surprising ability to continue to be intimate and connected, even though I wasn't physically present. Yeah.
I love that answer. Thank you. There's real beauty to the insight. It's like you do the thing, but the actual insight comes later.
Yeah. Surprised.
Yeah. And so in this case, the until finally might still very well have been going online. But this is also the role of the mentor. This is the role of getting help. And sometimes, so the thing that leads us out of the cave is sometimes surprising. It might be remembering something from long ago that finally feels relevant. It might be remembering something that somebody told you that is applicable and wasn't before. It might be that somebody tells you something right then, like you did, like you had the necessity and the guts to reach out into unknown territory. I'm pretty sure that when Joseph Campbell did his work with mythology, that there weren't a lot of people that were going on Zoom and finding finding their way of connecting with their clients on Zoom. And yet this is a great example of a mentor coming because you have openness and necessity to get that support. And of course, there's some times where we're still in the cave, where we're still there. And these are the stories that may not be stories yet. But I really appreciate that that the insight came later. So the until finally may very well have been the going online. But in this case, the ever since then, I think as Farian's saying, and you know, and as you're saying, is like that you embrace the brave new world of being together apart in the comfort of everyone's home, and to your own surprise, it actually to your own surprise.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah.
I just, as you were talking, there's a backstory that started to develop in my mind that what else allowed me to jump like that? And I started thinking of my grandparents migrating to this country, and of, you know, of family stories of being willing to you know, to jump into the unknown. So that kind of leap of faith is part of my family culture.
I love that. I love that. And I think it's part of my own passion and commitment and intrigue of how other people's stories help to embolden us for transformation, and whether that those other people might have been those people that were walking out of Ukraine as my ancestors were 100 years ago, or whether it was something that happened last week that gives us the insight. Thank you, Jan. Dee says, I think that the jumping into the unknown courage, everything about that decision, you know, how do we know when it's time to leap, is a great question. Let's hold that question. Ever since then, new opportunities and heart opening became possible through technology and a willingness to try. Thank you. So Jan, who was it that you heard from with this? Who would you partner with?
Who did I partner with is Ayana.
Okay, Ayana, you here? Where's Ayana? Yes, Ayana, are you up for sharing your story?
I feel really shy, but I'll do it.
Thank you.
I'm currently, and have been for quite a while, in an innermost cave. So I picked a story that just popped into my head from like 30 years ago. Yeah, I had graduated from college, had a job that I loved, and I kept getting sicker and sicker, and I was diagnosed with cancer. And back then, they thought cancer was a death sentence, and people were acting like I was just going to die. And I decided to leave my job and my home, and I went back to my parents' house, where there was an extra room where I could just stay for a while and figure out, just kind of be with myself. And at that point in my life, I was very against any kind of spirituality. I had been raised with pretty extremely abusive religion, and wanted nothing to do with anything that I lumped it all together. And so one day I was lying on a bed with beautiful white linen, and it was the afternoon, and I was really tired, and I was feeling desperate, and I was thinking about my life and all the things I'd been through, and I thought, you know, if I'm just gonna have all this suffering and then die anyway, I'd rather just die now, because I felt like I'd been through so much in my life, and I thought if I've been through so much just to have it come to nothing, then I don't know, I just was that's how I felt in that moment. I felt like that was it. But with that came this feeling of surrender, of just giving up instead, because I'd always try so hard. So I just surrendered, and I just lay down in the bed and just surrendered. And I had an experience that was something that was not something that I believe in at all. And but what I experienced was a spirit being, whether an angel or some kind of being, but she looked just like a human, except was glowing and floating. And she came into the room, and she reached her etheric hands into my body and just started doing this over the tumors. And I felt intense sensations in my body, so intense that I was like screaming and yelling, but it wasn't painful. It was just so intense. And then she looked in my eyes, and the biggest tumor was in my uterus. So she had her hands like in my uterus, and she looked in my eyes and she said, "Follow me." And then she grabbed from there and she just pulled that energy up in my heart. And she did that several times, and it felt like my body like turned into light and dispersed. And I heard this angelic singing for, you go to that timeless place where it felt like forever, but in like no time at all. And then when my body came back together, I realized I was singing, and I had never been able to sing before then. And then when I got up off the bed, the tumor like fell out of my body, and it wasn't like everything in my life changed, but as far as spirituality, that was the beginning of me kind of returning to gifts I had when I was a child, where I saw angels, other spirits. When people pass away, I would see them, they would talk to me, and animals communicated with me. Deaf people, I could hear everything they said in their mind, and I'd hear trees and plants, have relationships with them. All that had been really cut off. And but with that experience, it made me start believing again.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that story. That is an astounding story.
I mean, there are a lot more to it, in the sense that I'd had so much hatred over, I was taught to hate my female body, and I'd had a lot of sexual abuse and had intense shame. So there was a lot around pulling that energy into my heart. And there was a lot of other pieces, but the biggest change was opening me up again to listening to spirit.
Whew. Right. Ever since then, I listened to spirit again. I just want to share that one of my most favorite parts about your story was that as soon as you talked about angels singing, we heard the birds. Twice, both times that you spoke about that. So just being present for these transformations that live in our lives and beyond our lives, and the gifts that we receive, and being and being in the realm of story. What was the once upon a time? And when I say that question, I think you might have shared a once upon a time at the end, just a little that I think is interesting. But what was the once upon a time?
Are you asking me or for people?
I'm asking the group chat. Yeah. I think everybody's kind of stunned. I hated religion. I had gifts. I saw angels and spirits. Yeah, that was kind of what was interesting, is that you shared the once upon a time that it kind of bubbled up later. I was a young woman living her life. So there was this kind of, there's this earlier moment where you have this recognition, this belief, this practice, but yet you become disconnected from it. And through religion, through the suffering that you faced, you became disconnected from it. I was so broken that I wanted to be put back together. And you were just, there was a kind of once upon a time you were living your life, you were in college, out in the world. And then one day, what? Then one day is pretty clear on this one. The last one was COVID. This one was cancer. The two C's. So cancer. Yeah, my body said no. Yeah. So because of that, I went home. Yeah, because of that, I went home. And because of that, I was in my bed and I decided to give up. I said, if I'm going to go, I want to go now. I welcome death. And that certainly is a cave moment. Laying on the white linen sheets. Yeah, the white linen sheets. So in the cave, a mentor arrives in that moment of surrender, come through. And this is in between. There's a kind of journey. It's that in the curve, in the journey curve, it's that long. If you look, well, I took it off the screen, but it's that long between the innermost cave and the until finally. And yet a whole lifetime can live inside that moment. And so in this case, an angel showed up. And what did that angel look like? What do you remember about that experience? This is to everyone. What was the feeling that Ayana had? Like a human, but made of light. A female white light, light and nurturing. A brilliant energy. Appeared like a human, but floating above. With glowing energetic hands. So that's a pretty until finally moment. And yet here we are in the until finally moment, and that moment seems to last a long, long time, even if it happened relatively quickly. There's because of that, a few because of that's inside of the until finally. So this being arrives, and what happens next? Wise, kind, certain, trustworthy, certain of what must be done. And time does not exist at all in that point. And I love that. We're now beyond time. We're now in a different realm. She put her hands on my womb, put her light hands on my womb, reached out and lifted out the illness. And this is where, Ayana, this is where your story, and Jan, your story, this is where your story becomes our story. This is where we come back because of the way you've laid out the story. We become part of it, and we witness it again from different angles, from our own angle, through our own lens, and we remember elements and put them to words of our own words. Angel showed, and she put her light hands on my womb. She reached out and lifted the illness and released it to the sky. She spoke to me and said, "Follow me, follow me, follow me." And in her surrendered state, things happened that you observed and also experienced. And she knew you well, and she knew where your illness was. And then we come up the curve. So now we're up the curve. Now the journey is, now you have wind at your back, and yet it's still happening. And so you now stand up. So now Ayanna stands up. And what happens? It falls out of you. The illness falls out, which is fascinating because it was both lifted and it also fell. It both had weight, matter, it had heaviness, and yet also was lifted out as if the constraints were released as well. And you left that behind you. And ever since then, I began to open up to spiritual life again, as when she was a child, before religion tried to beat it out of her with tragic irony, reclaiming. And you heard singing, and when you're back in your body, you realized you were the one who was singing. And you didn't even sing before that. And ever since then, I sing. Let's land there. Thank you so much for your story. So the gems of our lives come into further clarity with the telling. And maybe the telling is a small audience. Maybe the telling is a large audience. Maybe the telling is to yourself. It often begins that way. And so we shape these gems and we hold them and look at them from different angles. And when we share them with others, we're able to see new dimensions and feel the dimensionality of the past. Because we've taken in so much data, 100,000 words a day, so much data. We're walking hard drives. And we're riding these bicycles of the mind every single day. And yet, when we give some presence and opportunity into these moments, into the moments of others, the past again gains its dimensionality. The metaverse becomes, again, the world around us. And we step back in to that healing, back into that transformation, back into that willingness to take a leap. So I'm going to call up another story. Anybody like to comment anything? Can come off the mute for a second and share what's going on for you or what's bubbling for you.
I'd like to say something, Jay.
Okay.
I was so blown away by Ayanna's story, but because of being a therapist and you were asking for details, I had to really be careful what, I didn't know what she was willing for me to say. And so it was really a relief when you called on her. And I'm just so glad that she could tell us all.
I really appreciate that. This is part of the balance of how we learn to communicate and listen to each other. And I appreciate that comment. Thank you for raising your hand, actually, Daniela. I didn't request that, but I appreciate it. Daniela, what are your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Jay. Danalia.
Danalia.
My name.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the process of having us hear a story and fabulous experiential way to learn. What I realized in the process is, even in the story that I shared, it it was a piece of it seems like this arc that we're doing, there's multiple, like the one that I shared about in 2020, it actually started in 2019. And so we could drill down into such an anecdotal version, potentially, of a story to share as a presenter. You know, I see how we can take that little micro thing and pull it out of the bigger story. And I'm grateful because as a growing presenter with my eco-relations work, I get confused about how much of my own story to share in order to present enough for the audience to follow me in what happens next. So anyways, that was a lot, but thank you.
I so agree with you. I so identify with that. And that's part of what we're gonna also talk a little bit more about as we hear this next story. The idea also that every story is tied to every story, and all grief is tied to grief, and all wonder is tied to wonder. And so that you can come and share your version, your moment that might be tied to so many pieces. When I shared the story of my dad, I wasn't going to share that story today, but I was just talking with him today, and I got some permission from him to share, to write about some of the darker sides of our relationship, which, you know, in this moment where we're kind of at the wall or in the extra innings is a big thing. But where does it start and where does it end? You know, and that's why we can take one moment, one glimmer of it, and we don't have to tell it all. You need to know it all. I want you to know your story and know the shades, but you don't have to share it all. So thank you. Let's go to Utah for a comment. Dee, what do you say?
Yeah, well, actually, to the same thing, my partner and I are in, the story really, there isn't an ending. We're in it right now, and it's really fascinating. Yeah, Danalia, you know, what part do you pick? And also, I'm just realizing, like, I'm in a lot of discomfort right now, and and I'm in discomfort because I was trying to get out of discomfort. So it's like, what do you do with that? But I do think it's oh, I don't know, for lack of a better word, therapeutic or process oriented to actually write stories within the stories. And Daniela, when I was thinking as you were speaking, I got this image of a pump, that's the fuel of the story. I don't even remember what it was associated with, but I saw it as fuel, and that was adding the pressure, and there was this pulse and this flow.
Bicycle of the heart. It's a great way of deepening the metaphor. And the idea that, so the number that I've landed on to bring to the forefront of wisdom stories from our lives, the number I've landed on in terms of an experiment is 8. 8 gems of wisdom from your life. And the experiment that I've gone on in these last 2 years, as I've been contemplating this question, what is the medicine of a story? And how can that medicine be both of service to the teller and service to the listener? And even how can that medicine find other listeners that need that medicine in this moment that might not be in the room? And so to play with 8 stories, imagine a circle with 8 gems on it. And to play with 8 transformative stories from your life that might very well be interdependent. It might be something that casts a greater story. It probably does. But to gather those and give them titles. And not just give them titles, but give them 2 titles. Give it a backup title. Play around with maybe it's a fun title. Maybe it's funny, maybe it's ironic. But the 2 title part, I think, is beneficial because it loosens you from your grasp on what the story is. And then give 8 backup stories. Those backup stories might be not quite ready for prime time stories. They might be I'm not quite sure stories. And also give those a title or 2 to loosen the grasp that we might have on the meaning. And that's how you form your constellation. The constellation of the wisdom that you've gathered in this lifetime. And you might not tell all of them. And you might still workshop on how to shape them. And that's where I think that frameworks can be helpful. I really welcome any framework that you have or any framework you've learned. I mean, I worked a lot with trying to work with the hero's journey. And I found that it, as immensely powerful as it may be for mythology, it's a little bit hard for a travel story because there are so many steps. And so I invite you to gather your collection in the form of 8 stories and consider them in a circle with names and consider how they fit together and consider which ones are being asked to be told right now. And that's where the backup stories come in, because sometimes they might be slotted in and slotted out, but I like and have practiced the idea of holding those 8 and seeing what happens. And so I'd like to hear a story, and forgive me because I want to hear all of your stories. And this is part of the challenge of such an experience. And it's hard to choose or to select or to draw in. So please recognize that the intent of gathering the stories is both for deeper insight and also as a deeper way of providing color for your own experience. But I really want to hear the story of the fox. So I don't know who told it, but are you up for sharing it?
Yes, that was me. It's a long story of a good friend of mine. We were actually sharing some woo-woo ayahuasca journeyed experiences, which are always fun. Grandmother medicine and Pachamama pull no punches. So a young girl who felt really bereft of love in her life, starting with her parents, telling her what to do, but never really showing her how to love, got pregnant really early in life, in high school. And being afraid to be scorned by the parents who she felt like never really loved her, she wore heavier and heavier sweatshirts to hide the bump that was growing in her belly. Come to transpire that the baby wasn't viable. The young boy that swore that she loved her suddenly went away. And so she had to go to the hospital. Her parents found out about it and pretty much didn't talk to her and isolated her from just love again for many, many years. She handled it the best she could, feeling deep in her womb a scar that kept on growing, so much so she could never have a menstrual cycle since then. She's since moved on and found another love in her life that she stayed with for 9 years, deciding that they needed to grow more together when really it was always her journey all along. She went to the jungles of Peru to go on her first spiritual just path and journey. What she come to find, it was a month-long experience where you could go in and out of these this village with the ayahuasca. She had a shaman, a lady shaman, 6 generations of practicing the ancient sacred plant medicine. The shaman laid her down and she went to her first full moon experience. And again, Pachamama didn't pull any punches. She showed this glowing orange light in her sacral chakra, growing and growing. And she felt this electric energy blowing up inside her. And Pachamama said she had a choice. she could let it grow and stay there, or she could listen to her every word and grow and become the higher self she was seeking to be, feeling unified and loved. So she reluctantly said, okay, I don't know what that entails. The orange glowing light from her sacral chakra grew up her spinal column, came out her mouth. So visceral was this, she actually shoken awake and actually purged in real life. The second night in and out of this hut in the jungles of Peru, she met with Pachamama again, her partner laying on the floor next to her as she was going on this spiritual vision quest. Pachamama is like, the person you come with isn't the person that you're going to leave with out of the jungle. He's not going to be, at least if you persist to say no, because they had a codependent wanting to love someone relationship, but maybe they didn't find the love in each other. She was just resistant to taking Pachamama's advice in the second vision quest. And that night, she didn't want to say that this guy of 9 years wasn't the one. But again, she's like, I'm going to send you a symbol when you wake up. You'll know how this will transpire. And she sat with grandmother spirit for 5 hours. In her mind, at least, it seemed like an eternity. No, he won't understand. He needs me. He'll act like a child. He won't handle this. It'll be a trauma, just like it was a trauma when I lost my baby all those years ago. She woke up, her finger, the ring that he gave her, because they were engaged, started glowing so bright like a hot ember coal. She had to rip it off her finger and throw it across the Amazonian ravine, and never saw it again. And of course, her partner went into a frantic frenzy thinking, oh, she doesn't love me, she doesn't want to be with me. But it was Pachamama letting her know, whether or not you still want to be with this guy, it is inevitably going to happen, because he is not the one you're sworn to be with before you're even born. Fast forward 3 years, she was waiting at a bus stop at a bench. In a freak split second of a moment, a guy who was on a scooter trying to swerve out of the way of a car that was coming at him. Apparently the car didn't adhere to road signs or lines in the road, made him jump the curb. And as she went to get out of the way of the scooter, it was going to ram right into her. She jumped to the side and actually cracked her skull in the head, resulting in a serious TBI. And the doctor said it'd take her 3 years to recover, and she would never be the same. She did the spiritual work, the meditation work, having hope at that point that maybe Pachamama said she'd have a serious accident, but she would recover and find the one. What transpired is her partner of 9 years that never looked at her the same, because she did explain to him she would have this traumatic accident. When she got the accident, he felt so guilty. He retired from talking to her, being loving to her, and felt the guilt of knowing it was going to happen, and was actually starting to be mean to her emotionally. And so they just slowly separated, again, feeling bereft of love, even though shortly after the ayahuasca journeys with this man, she felt like she could stay with him because she started getting her menstrual cycle again. The glowing thing that came out of her that she purged in real life actually gave her the gift of menstruation and the feeling that she could have babies again. Since she was estranged with her boyfriend, they decided to finally part years. 11 years in, it was a really hard road, but he organically filtered out of her life just because he wasn't physically present anymore. He was a ghost of who he was. 2 years later, she was walking in the beach during a full moon, doing her own ceremony, thanking Pachamama in her own way for her womb being restored, at least having her vitality in her life. And along comes a fox. The fox sits beside her. She didn't know what it meant. She wasn't big into animal totems at the time, but it just sat with her and looked at the moon. And without speaking, the fox, without touching her, just looked with its eyes and said, "You should come back here." Fast forward to the next full moon, she came back and saw a boy, another young man walking along the beach. And she didn't know what it meant. And she was alone, and yet she was sitting in the aloneness and being happy with herself. She wondered in that moment, would she see the fox again? The fox came out of the woods, walked directly between them as if it was a ghost from the forest, and just sat there in front of her and this young boy in the pale moonlight. And it just sat there without saying a word as they sat down and had a deep conversation. And it wouldn't leave until they made one decisive action, sitting down to speak. As soon as they sat down and got engaged in conversation and found all their commonalities of life and their turmoils, the fox nodded to them, walked directly in between them as they were sitting down without saying a word, and returned never to be seen again. And to this day, this girl believes that the prophecy, the shaman woman in the jungles came to be, and she's with her forever life mate that she promised to be with before her soul was even born into her human body.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stephanie. Was that a story of a friend, or was that a story of you that you told in third person?
It was a story of a friend. And I loved it so much. I asked her if I could share it because I remembered what we were saying before, don't share other people's stories. And she's like, it's one of the things I actually share when helping people heal, when she introduces them to the idea of microdosing ayahuasca, because natural plant medicines may seem natural and good in theory, but if it's the unknown, what's to relate people to try different modalities of healing? It's storied experiences. So I loved it so much. It made me think about my woo-woo experiences like that. One of which I had very similar to Ayana. And I don't know why, I just chose to share her story today because it's a news story and I love news stories.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. What was the once upon a time of that story? Do it in chat. There was an unloved girl. Yes, there are several moments within the story. I think that the putting it to frame is a good opportunity. A traumatized young woman, teenager who felt unlovable. Then one day, she got pregnant. Then one day, so it's COVID, it's cancer, it's pregnancy. Then one day that sends you on the journey. Because of that, yes, conception, thank you. Because of that, she went to the jungle. Well, before that, the jungle was something that happened later. So after the pregnancy was the releasing of the pregnancy. Her parents rejected her. Further lack of love. Because of that, she went to the jungle. Innermost cave. It's kind of two stories. There's kind of the first story, which comes as a result of the Pachamama experience. She realized that she chose a codependent relationship. Question of what's remaining. She let go. There was the sacral rising and the ring being tossed. If you look at the until finally, it's a triangle, and that's because it is in the mountain. And the mountain, so it's perfect to have a Pachamama story as that. The medicine journey was kind of an innermost cave and the realizations that happened from that. And so we come out of the cave, and because of that, this is where it gets to be a little bit, this is an opportunity for some shaping to kind of come back to the framework. And I think challenge yourself to say, like, if I was going to choose it then one day, if I was going to choose it until finally, if I was going to choose it ever since then, what would they be? Because it could be that there's either two stories or that one can be kind of tucked inside of the other. So she suspended the decision, ended up at a bus stop, and then the fox appeared. Right? And the fox appeared on the beach. And the fox appeared again on the beach. So this could be a story of the fox appearing, and all of the other bits could be tucked inside of the fox story. And a new person, so we could spend some more time with this this story. But what's the ever since then? Ever since then is lasting relationship. Ever since then is listening to signs. She's with her partner. And I would say ever since then, we could take Stephanie's story and contextualize it as well. Ever since then, I tell this story to bring people into transformative experience, to be aware and open to what's possible when you listen to the signs. Question, what about starting with the end? I completely support starting with the end. I completely support starting with the innermost cave, and completely, sometimes a lot of people want to go to the until finally, and there's power there too, as long as you don't illuminate too much. I think if you give a little sampling of drawing out of the cave, a sampling of, I want to share with you a moment of an intervention with a fox. I want to share with you a moment of throwing away the ring. Something that draws us in, that is relevant to the audience, is very beneficial. Yeah, they lived together and had many children. That's where we go into the fabulous. Thank you for that, for sharing that, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. It's powerful, and I'm glad. I think that it's, our collection of stories can involve others' stories for sure, because those other stories and the stories that we gathered today can inform us. They can become a part of our collection or inform our collection. I feel like, are there 8 gems in that one story? Great question. There's the fox, there's the ring, there's the sacral eruption, there's the baby, this is something that could be an entire, you could take the story and stretch it out into
an anthology almost, yeah.
Well, or bring it together into a book and frame it. And tell it, take an hour to draw us into the journey, tell it live, give context of why it's important to you, and take it as a fable and draw us into it, and then and reveal why it's important to you. So we get to this point in our journey where I feel like I want to spend the afternoon with you, or the morning, depending on which continent you're on. But I want to run through a few other things. Yes, and with music, let's add music to the story, and let's bring the drum. Thank you. So I want to come back to sharing really quick. Oopsie, that wasn't right. I'm going to come back to sharing and give us some conclusion on the frame. So my intent was to share with you today an opportunity for deeper shaping, or another set of tools to bring your shaping into life, so that you can hold these gems of wisdom, that you can orient yourself to them in a different way, that you can travel back to these moments that hold these stories, and see what comes to life, and see what comes to life through hearing other people's stories, through being in the practice of mapping other people's stories. Whenever I hear something, I always give it a shape. I always throw 3 triangles down, and I try to see what are the key pieces. And I think it might be, I'm listening to somebody telling a story in the cafe. I go and I draw it. I say, does this fit? What am I learning from this story? What sticks with me? If something happened yesterday and it's really with me, I might retell it. I might work to shape it because it's alive. And then I ask, what does it have for me? And I might ask that question 5 times. I might say, well, why is the story still with me? Whether it's mine or somebody else's. And then I might say, well, why is it really with me? And then I might say, well, no, seriously, why is it really with me? Why does this story actually matter? And I do that, and I recommend that to my clients before they go on stage or before they step up. When a story is calling to you, ask yourself 5 times why that story matters, and you might find a different answer than you did yesterday or last week. And it becomes a little tedious. You're like, why am I asking why again? But it's because the story has something to tell you that you might not have been ready to hear, and that it's relevant to the audience today that you might not have been ready to speak to. Back to the elder Steve Jobs. You can't connect the dots going forward. You can only connect them going backwards. So while we might be faced with these challenges, while we might be in a story right now that feels not yet ready to tell or not clear about where it's going, we come to this time with gems of insight, and we go to connect those dots. We connect them, and we come to today and figure out and feel into and run that bicycle of the heart and tell those stories to those that are ready to hear them, or those that we've gotten permission to share. And we connect the dots into something greater, into a greater story. Because we're traveling behind this sun that is moving at 500,000 miles an hour. And our lifetime is not a lifetime of moving in circles. It's a lifetime of moving in spirals. And our lives are made of this collection of spirals, so that a story that happened to you, like the beautiful stories that were shared today, might not mean the same thing. And in fact, it very well shouldn't mean the same thing that it did back then. And it might have a different beginning, and it might have a different end. But being determinate, discerning about trying new ways of choosing those moments, of choosing that then one day, of choosing a different until finally, of dropping into the cave in a way that feels alive, even a way that feels edgy, gives us new insights. And so I believe that your legend is really a collection of those spirals. And that's what I want to invite you to do as you travel away from this time, in our time together, to put a few pieces of paper together and to create your own legend, to run those spirals. For me, I've got 52 of them. And just run on a piece of paper, put a line across the middle, and run the spirals, and draw your insights from what the high points and low points were, and see what other stories come up. You might just give them a word or a symbol. Maybe it's a heartbreak, or maybe it's an insight, or maybe it's a ladder. But you can mark your legend, the place where the data lives, the place where those stories give us insight. And you can gather from them and gather new insights. Go back in time to those places. Go back into the innermost cave. Look around again. Feel around again. Ask again, who brought you through? What brought you through? Look for those moments of wonder that you might have left behind. And then do it again. And then you take them and you try using the journey curve or whatever story framework you like, and see what stories, how can they be told differently? So this is where all of your data lives. Your legend is the data. The legend is actually how you read the signs. It's how you read the signs. It's how you read the map. That's what creates a legend. So I want to invite you, as you go forward, to explore that legend, to take that big piece of paper and draw your life map. I know you've done a version of that. I want to invite you to try doing this. Quite simply, just put the high points, the low points, the insights, the participants, the things that got you through, and then try it again. I've done this several times in the last 2 years. And every time I get something new, and the output is to shape them and to create your constellation. So that those 8 stories comes from creating your legend. And those 8 backup stories with the backup titles. So I know that's a lot and it's quick, but if you want to, I'm happy to share this the deck with you, or you can take a screenshot. Want to just wrap with 6 steps. I want to repeat these 6 that we've kind of talked about. Revive those adventures. We look at time as flat, these memories as something that existed back then. But if you go back into those moments and you look around and you bring your senses and you describe them, you're going to find that new things appear, new components appear. If you share the stories and you ask for reflections, you'll find dimensionality that's available to you. It's part of the richness of this existence. And as you're working to discern your collection of stories, you can leverage those moments, bring them back into life. Draw your audience. Think about who you're talking to. Draw them into a bit of that risk, a bit of that dopamine, a bit of cortisol. Leverage some stress and be careful about too much stress. Bring them into the cave. Let them sit there in that mystery. Feel the risk of it, and then take them out. Because these stories are truly about transformation. It's about the transformation in the cave and the moment of not knowing, the wisdom of the not knowing, the release, the surrender, the invitation of the mentor, the consideration. That's where the power lives. The invitation to Pachamama, the questioning of the signs, the asking again, why is that fox here? The wondering, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to possibly make such a tactile experience into a digital experience? Well, the answer is it's not a digital experience. It's a translocal experience. It's your heart connecting with another person's heart, just happening to use some visuals and sound that brings us to another place. Don't forget to elevate out. A story is not just a problem. A problem is very powerful and it can be shared in the right environment. And it's very important as you're looking for how to make some of these into stories. But remember always to elevate out in the stories that we're telling. And challenge yourself to become a story listener. The greater story listeners are the greater storytellers. And it's always, always, always a new study. And ask yourself why 5 times. Why is this important? What does it have to say today? It can be something totally different than it was yesterday. Land your meaning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so
Oh.
much for coming, bringing your whole selves.
Oh, thank you, Jay. Thank you for your generosity in sharing such a broad range of incredibly effective and useful skills, and for drawing out these wonderful stories that we've heard. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor. It's a real honor, and I'm very appreciative of what everybody's bringing, and the transformative stories. I love to be in the place of the ethereal shift, and I'm glad that is a safe place to bring your deeper wisdom as well as our material wisdom that we carry with us every day. So thank you, everyone. And I know that I didn't get to everyone, of course, and I know that I didn't even answer all the questions. I'm happy to spend a couple more minutes if we want to talk about some of those questions. And I was just, matching time is always part of the challenge in these things.
Yeah. Tanya, you've got a question.
I do have a question. Just I got a little bit confused. Thank you so very much. All this is so incredibly insightful. But I think where I got lost a little bit is you said that our constellation comes from creating our own legend. And I am having a little bit hard time understanding which one is constellation and which one is our legend. If you could just really briefly, I'm sorry.
Thank you for asking. I think that's a gap in my visuals. We're dealing with different tools, okay? So the first tool is the legend. And I know that word legend often means something like your great story, but I use that word differently. I use the legend as the way of reading the map. And that in fact, that's how people become legends, because they know how to read the map. They learned how to read the map, how to recognize when the hurdle was calling them, to recognize when the fox was telling them something, or when it was time to do something immensely uncomfortable, or when it was time to recognize that it's time to surrender. So those are all signs on the map. So that's the legend. That's gathering the data from your life and the insights and holding them all. And then what you do is you take that and you bring it into the journey curve. So you bring it to shape the stories. And you work, or whatever framework you want to use. But to me, it's kind of finding that until finally, finding that change that ever since then. And so you workshop, again, how you shape those stories. Do you gather, you might gather a moment from when you were 6 years old, and then you might take another moment to when you were in the innermost cave to when you were 21. And then you might take another moment to now. And that's the shaping process. And through that shaping process, you gather them into gems and you hold them, and that becomes your constellation. And that constellation reveals a greater story. But before we worry about the greater story, let's just hold the gems. Let's hold those gems and shake them up and shape them up and find out what new things they have to say for us.
Thank you very much. That really clarified it for me. Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Any other questions for Jay? I think we're all really full.
Yeah, I know. Well,
Sitting with so much, that was so rich.
thank you. Well, and I know those questions. My email is jay@retellable. I put it up at jay@retellable.com. And I welcome any thoughts or questions. And I really welcome you to take your questions out into the world, because the answers are there, and the other storytellers in the group and out in the world have their answers too. And I'm grateful to have the chance to further my own purpose of cultivating a legion of storytellers, of helping to catalyze meaning makers in the world. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
Safe travels on this
Everybody.
planet. Thank you, Jacqueline, for waking up early on the other side of the world, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and thank you all again for these moments.
Have a wonderful day, everybody, and you too, Jay. Thank you for all the work you do in the world. It's precious work.
Safe travels,
Thank you.
Not too safe.
Be a little bit dangerous, as Clarissa says.